Welcome to the podcast, Olivia.
Hi.
Good to have you. The question or topic that we're going to talk about today is around grief, how your story and your journey that you've been through it, and then also maybe reflections and advice that you would have for someone like yourself in a similar situation in the future.
Sounds good.
Cool. Okay. Then introduce yourself in terms of how you're spending your time now, and then we can, jump straight into your journey with it and the events that happened.
I'm Olivia. I'm 27 and I live in North London. I was going to say by day, I'm a procurement and contracts manager. It sounds like I do something more interesting by night, but I don't. At the moment, I'm on a bit of extended leave from my job as a result of what happened last year. But I am starting to do a bit of a phased return at the moment. What am I doing with my time? A lot of reformer Pilates spin, going to see a lot of shows and getting increasingly excited about the Taylor Swift concert that's in a couple of weeks. But yeah, I wish it could be something more interesting, but it's all quite basic.
Cool. Nice. And the reformer Pilates, how long have you been doing that?
Oh, probably a couple of years. I grew up being a dancer, so I've always kind of been into dance and then moved on to Pilates, yoga, things like that. But reformer has my heart because it's just like a better version because you get to like swing around with ropes and pulleys and on a bed. So it's just more interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So then in terms of your dad recently died about 12 months ago.
Yeah.
How has that been for you? And take us through the moments that it initially happened and how you were feeling about it.
Yeah. So, it's coming up to the year anniversary. So we're just into August today and it was the 7th of August last year. So yeah, basically a year, which is mind blowing. I can't believe it's been a year. So yeah, the kind of situation at the time, I was living in northwest London, in a house share with 3 other girls. I was working at a different job, sort of more junior level. And yeah, it's kind of, life was really good, was really enjoying living in London, was really close, like with my parents. I'm an only child and we've always been really close. And then the story kind of started almost before he died. In about mid-June, we got served a no-fault eviction, Section 21, which I think are being banned, which is great. But yeah, so we had to get out of our house. So was in the middle of looking for a new house and all of that. I was also applying for a new job, which was going to be like a big career step up. So there was a lot going on. And I had this week approaching where I had, like the main panel interview for the job on the Wednesday or something like that, and had to be out of the house by the weekend. So it was already like a lot. And then, my 57-year-old, completely healthy dad, non-smoker, not overweight, not a huge drinker, was out on a bike ride on the Monday morning and had a massive heart attack. Spent the afternoon with him in the hospital, in the ICU, while they tried to save him, at which they couldn't, and he died that evening. In the space of sort of, I think my mum rang me at like midday, and he died by about 7:30 that evening. Mm-hmm. So suddenly, like, my world obviously completely like changed, and it was so out of the blue. Obviously,
At what moment did you think that something was potentially quite serious?
I don't think I ever, I think we didn't really know much when we arrived at the hospital because he was taken off for surgery. We had no idea kind of how major the initial heart attack was. We didn't know if he was conscious. Like, when I went to the hospital, all I took with me was like my work laptop because I thought he'd be just having tests and I'd be bored and waiting around and doing some emails. So I had no idea. And like I said, like, he wasn't ill or anything like that. Me and my mum were in the waiting room of the ICU, and there was another woman in there who, I think her husband was having an operation. and some nurses came in and they went over to speak to her, and she started freaking out and like really upset. And they said to her, don't panic. Like, we wouldn't give you bad news in a waiting room. Like, we're just updating you that he's out of surgery. You can see him soon. Like, we would never tell you anything bad in the middle of a waiting room. Like, it's okay. And then a few minutes later, a consultant came in and asked me and my mum to come with him into a separate room. So I was then like, oh, okay, we're being given bad news. And I think he spoke to us, and a lot of it I kind of can't really remember, but he basically was trying to get across that, the next 24 hours were critical, and just kind of how unwell he was, and how the procedures that they tried to do with fitting stents that usually work hadn't worked. And yeah, then the next few hours we kind of got to see him, and then we were back in the waiting room, and then we were back to see him.
When you got to see him, what kind of condition was he in?
Yeah, not not good. Obviously, yeah, he never regained consciousness, so he was unconscious. There was like probably about 30 monitors that he was hooked up to that were all beeping away and doing different things. Loads of doctors, nurses. My cousin, who's actually a doctor at that hospital, but it was her day off, she came in, obviously as it's, to support us, but also to help with like the things the doctors were telling us that we weren't, necessarily taking in. And I think she understood, I know she understood a lot more than we did, because obviously she was in that weird position of, she was there as a family member, but also she knew what these machines were indicating and the things that they were doing, and how he perhaps wasn't responding as you'd want someone that was going to get better would. So I think she knew like several hours before we did that that he wasn't going to make it, which I never really did. I think it seemed too huge to like get my head around, because I was like, he was fine that morning. And yeah, it was just, I think I had it in my head when the consultant said like, the next 24 hours are critical kind of thing. So every minute that passed, I was like, he's made it through another minute. He's made it through another minute. Like, this is good. This is good. And, my cousin kind of had to say to me, like, at this point, even if he doesn't die, he's not going to recover, which I couldn't, that never crossed my mind. In my mind, it was like, he's either going to be fine or he's going to die. So like, they need to carry on doing everything they can. But it got to a point where if he had survived, he would not have been like himself. He would have been, I don't know, like severely, like, because all his oxygen been gone for so long, like it wouldn't have been like had any quality of life. But that genuinely did not like feature. For some reason, my brain had it as, oh, he either gets better or he dies, so they need to like keep going. But they told us he was the sickest person in the whole hospital at that point. And they'd run out of adrenaline to give him. They'd given so much adrenaline that they'd actually run out, which like it didn't matter. Like, they wouldn't have saved him if they had more. Like, it was too far gone.
For sure.
Yeah. Makes sense. That was quite a like insane statistic, I guess. Yeah.
And then when did it come to the moment that he ultimately passed on?
They said to us, I think it was between about 7:30 in the evening, and they said to me and my mum that we were going to have to make a decision to turn off the machines, because his organs had been too damaged. I can't remember obviously it was a heart attack. There was the stent thrombosis, was the stents failing because they immediately clotted, and then there was another thing on his death certificate which means like, I think it's cardiogenic shock, something like that. Basically, all your organs are fucked. So they said that to us, and almost straight away after they said that, he then died of his own accord. So we didn't have to make that decision, that choice. So that all kind of happened quite quickly. But it was not a nice moment, obviously, and you kind of realize that you can't quite believe it. I think my mum actually called it a few seconds before it actually happened. My cousin later told me.
When you said called it, in what
My
sense?
mum, I think my mum heard a beep or a long beep and said, like, he's gone. And my cousin later said, yeah, he hadn't actually at that point. But it was like very imminent, like within a minute. So my mum basically decided he was dead and he actually wasn't. But yeah, like within seconds. So it was a bit weird. But yeah, they kind of went along with it because they knew that in the next few seconds it was going to happen. But yeah.
And then the trip home that evening from the hospital, how did that go?
Yeah, I can't really remember. Like my aunt, my dad's sister, was the mother of my cousin. She was traveling on her way. She had like a 3-4 hour drive, so she was still driving when he died. So she arrived. So it was me, my mum, my aunt, and my cousin. We were the only people then at the hospital after he died. And we were lucky. The ICU was really quiet that day, so they didn't need the bed. So we like stayed with him. So like it was probably a good 3 hours we were there for after he died, maybe two or three. And then yeah, we left, and that was just, I remember like walking across the car park, like being held up by my cousin and just like shaking. And then yeah, getting home, like we got back to my mum and dad's house. My aunt and cousin went back to my cousins who lives nearby, and we were just like, what's just happened? Like, what? And I remember like my mum, I really clearly remember, so my mum has lupus, just an autoimmune disease, and she she's got a blood condition, so she has to take medication at certain times, that has to be had with food. And obviously we hadn't eaten like all day at the hospital because not really that hungry when something like that's happening. But she had to have these pills. So I just remember her like, it's probably like 10, 11 o'clock at night back home, both of us like completely devastated and in shock. And bless her, she's trying to like force herself to eat a yogurt so she can take this medication. And yeah, it's just stuff like that that kind of sticks. And then, yeah, it's just like, what hell just happened? Like, yeah, it's really, really weird. Really weird feeling.
And the next morning, when the administration almost and all the various processes that come after it, how did you deal with that?
Yeah, it's a lot. Like I think it's a lot whenever anyone dies, but especially when someone dies very suddenly and at an age where you're not expecting them to die. No affairs have been wrapped up in any way. Yeah, so I think the first thing I sort of did was we had to tell everyone, and because he wasn't ill, no one was expecting to hear that news. So I had to make a lot of phone calls. We'd called a few people on the night it happened in a hospital, like my grandma and my parents' best friends, but the vast majority of people I had to do the next morning, and that was horrific. I had people like screaming down the phone at me, like not like at me, but yeah.
How do you even begin to approach that conversation, knowing that you have to deliver that news?
I think people thought it was weird, like my parents' friends, like obviously I wouldn't usually call them. So when I was ringing and was like, oh, it's Olivia, they were a bit like, oh. So I feel like some people kind of knew that, something happened. And then I had to ask each of them if I had to check they weren't driving, because I thought, like, people can be on Bluetooth and speaker, and I thought, God, the last thing you want is to give someone a shock like that while they're driving and cause a crash. So that was what I always asked first. Yeah, and I don't really remember. I mean, it was weird saying it. Like, I found it really hard for ages to say that, like, my dad died. Yeah, I think I just kind of blurted it out each time. Like, yeah, it was weird, yeah. And people were obviously just like completely in shock. Yeah, it was just a bit of a blur that whole day. And then, yeah, so much admin, like weeks and weeks and weeks worth of work. Just, yeah, sorting everything out with the house and bills and death certificates and registrations and funeral and like my dad's work, and like we're lucky that he was in the Met Police, so it was a death in service, so the Met really look after the family left behind.
How does that manifest itself to someone who doesn't know anything about the Met Police?
Yeah.
What would that look like?
Yeah, so I mean, I'd say it's kind of a few sides to it. I mean, there is like financially, you know, we like wouldn't be okay with like, you know, without them. Like it very, very like helped us with sort of various schemes that my dad had paid into throughout his time. Obviously you hope that you never get the sort of benefit from them, but it's good that they're there.
For sure.
They, you know, we decided we did want a service funeral, so they're very involved in that, helping with organising and with sort of ceremonial parts. It's like a drape that goes on the coffin, and they do a guard of honour, and it was like various bits throughout the service, which was really nice. Loads of his colleagues came in their sort of ceremonial uniform. And
what does a ceremonial police officer's uniform look like?
It's just a bit fancy. It's what they wear like when they have their like pass. They barely ever wear it. They wear it for like their passing out parade, when they first join the police. And I honestly don't know any other time that my dad would have worn his. There must have been something, but it's basically like a very like smart. I think they're called tunics, but it looks like a suit, like a smart jacket thing, and they have the hat and all the stripes and things.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And then they've also, his sort of immediate team, his sergeant is like still regularly in touch with my mum. He's, you know, they've helped with like just random things around the house. And they did, when it was about 6 months in, they got like a plaque put up to him in like the borough headquarters. Nice. So we went up there and they did like a little afternoon tea. Only recently, actually, we got from them a book, like a memorial book that had like gathered everyone's like messages and things police-wise into one place. They made this sort of, it's in a giant frame. It's got like his numbers and like bits from his uniform, like stripes, like in a nice frame. So yeah, just stuff like that.
And what did you? I would imagine a number of your colleagues, or a number of your dad's colleagues, you didn't necessarily know much before his death. How did meeting them, you know, change, or what did you find out about your dad from meeting his colleagues?
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like, particularly with the police, people often do keep it quite separate with their like home life, just because of the nature of the job, I guess. But I knew that he had like good friends there. We used to tease him. There was one lady in particular who was like his best friend, and they got on like a house on fire. But they were so different. She was like very glam and like just lovely lady. Like we know her really well now. And they just always be texting like kids and like giggling and just getting into trouble and stuff like that. But yeah, we'd never like really met. I certainly hadn't met any of them. I don't think my mum had either. So it was really nice to kind of finally put faces to names of all these people and kind of learn about him through their eyes. And it was quite funny because he definitely wasn't a person having like a double life, like a secret life. Like the things they were saying and like would tease him about, me and my mum were like, yeah, that's literally like.
Oh, what sort of things? Do you have a specific example? You
know, he'd have to like have a banana at like 11 o'clock exactly, and he'd have to have his tea like brewed exactly right at the right time, and he'd be obsessive about catching the right train and like just little things. That just, he's just clearly exactly the same like as he is at home. But I think what struck me was like how many people were really like genuinely affected and genuinely like devastated by his death and sort of the suddenness of it. Like obviously me and my mum were always going to be like, it's always going to change our world, like we're going to be distraught, but to kind of have so many people, like I was social media manager for my mum in the days after, and like I received hundreds of messages from people he'd worked with ages ago, and just, you know, obviously all that generation is still on Facebook, so that's kind of was quite a good way to get the word out. And yes, so many messages, and even now, like, people still, still talk about him and they still really miss him, which is really nice. Yeah. I think because being an only child, it's, he was only my dad. So I feel like I don't have a big family that kind of feel that level of loss that me and, well, obviously my mum has. But so this is kind of a nice, like, other way of kind of getting that, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And, we've spent a lot more time with his colleagues. We've been to visit, like, his best friend down in Whitstable, which was lovely. So it's really nice.
Nice. And then the funeral itself, you said it was a service funeral. What was the part that you played in it?
I wanted my main character moment. No. So I have, unfortunately, in my family become the resident funeral speaker. I've been to a lot of funerals. I think between the ages of 19 and 26, I think I went to 7. And most of them were young or middle-aged people. There was only one very elderly person. Yeah. So, I've spoken at my grandpa's funeral. I've spoken at my uncle's funeral. Like, it's... so obviously I wanted to speak at my dad's, because there was no one else that could give that perspective on him. So I wrote a piece, which I put off writing for quite a long time. I said the celebrant, she was being so lovely.
What's a celebrant?
She's so like a non-religious funeral lead. Well, they do weddings as well, but like instead of having like a priest or a vicar, so we're not religious. Like my dad was brought up Catholic, but lapsed as a teenager, so I wasn't brought up religious. So we had like the odd nod, we had like a prayer at the end, but it was predominantly a non-religious ceremony. So you tend to have a celebrant who's just
makes sense.
And she was lovely, and I said to her, I was like, you need to give me a deadline for when you need this piece, because there's so much to do, other stuff to do, and I'm just going to keep putting it off. And she was being so lovely, and she was like, well, I've said to the other speakers I need it by then, but obviously you can have as long. And I was like, nope, tell me you need mine then too. So she did. So I eventually was like, right, I need to write this. So I just sat down in my room and like, I think it took me 2 hours. I just wrote the whole thing and read it to my mum, and then was like, cool, this is good.
How did your mum receive it?
Oh, she cried, obviously. Yeah. I think she was very much like, look, you don't have to read it if you don't want to, like, don't feel bad if it gets to the day and you just can't do it. And the celebrant had said the same. I think she was like, obviously has been in this situation a lot of times, and she was like, look, if you need someone, you can either, I can take over, or someone of your choosing can take over, or whatever. And I was kind of like, no. I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm definitely going to do it. And I think she was kind of like, okay. I'm thinking like, she doesn't realize how horrendous this is going to be. Yeah. But I just...
So was it horrendous, or how did you feel the moment when you had to step up and start speaking into the mic?
Yeah. So I did do it, obviously, spoiler alert, because I think I was so determined to do it because obviously I'd written it in my voice. And so I knew that it wouldn't be as good if anyone else read it, because like I know how I would want to say things. And I'd quite carefully chosen the order. Obviously I kind of, with my mum, like we planned the entire obviously service. And I remember the celebrant saying to me, you should say your thing first, so then you're done and you haven't got that pressure hanging over you. But I was like, I want to go last because I'm the most important.
That's fair.
So I kind of looked at the other speakers, and it was his sister and his best friend from school, and then and the inspector from his work. So it's like quite a senior ranked police. And I was like, you know what? I'll go after him because his will be the least emotional, because it'll probably be, about Chris was a good colleague, blah, blah, blah. So I'll go after him because then I'll be, there's nothing that's going to sort of shake me up, not an emotional piece of music. It's not, I know his best friend was going to be welling up. Like, I'll go after the inspector. Perfect. And the inspector sobbed his way through his speech. He was really emotional. And I was like sitting there like, oh, crap. that was not the plan. Yeah, so then when it got to it, I think I didn't really, I thought I was like, okay, just look at someone. I knew where I couldn't look. I knew I couldn't look at my mom, obviously, or my grandma, and I couldn't look at the other front row that had like their best friends on, because they were all, there's like three couples, and they were all obviously absolutely gone. So I was like, you know what, just pick someone at the back that you don't really know, who's not as close, who's just going to be, you know, like not sobbing. Could not find a single person that wasn't crying. And I was like, oh God. So I just kind of did from a bit of a middle distance staring.
Did you pick anyone?
No, because everyone was crying. So everyone would have made me cry. Yeah, God, hold it together, people. So yeah, so I did it, and I got through it. I think I had a little bit of a wobble on a sentence at the end, but yeah, it was fine. And it was, you know, I still say it was hard, but it was the easiest part of the whole day for me, because like I had a job to do and I wanted to do it well. Whereas the rest of the day was like, how is this happening? Is this real? Oh my God, my dad's died. Whereas, yeah, doing that, I could kind of just go into like, I don't say work mode, but like I've had to do a lot of public speaking throughout my life for various reasons, and kind of, I don't mind it. So I could kind of go into that zone a bit and be like, I know what I've written is good, and I want people to hear these stories about me and my dad. And I think they're funny. So, yeah.
Yeah, the moment after you've given the speech, you know, how do you feel? How do you go back to the crowd? How do you transition from being in that moment to...
Yeah, I think it was right at the end, so I think there was like maybe the prayer and then a piece of music, so there wasn't really much left. So I kind of, to be honest, was completely like away with the fairies a bit. And you know, it's getting to the end, and they present me and my mum with his two helmets, and then yeah, obviously you have like the final bit of music, and then like, you know, you're kind of saying your final goodbye. And yeah, my mum like found that really, really difficult. So my focus was just kind of like being there for her. I was, yeah, and just trying to not completely lose it. Yeah. I think I was just like, it's not real. It's not real. Yeah.
And now, 12 months on, with life's other various stresses that naturally come along, how have you dealt with things? Yeah, how have you dealt with things?
Yeah. So I think, I mean, it was so much all at once, because, like I said, I had the job and the house was also happening. So I pulled out of the job. But you can't pull out of an eviction. They still want you to get out. So yeah, we were obviously in the midst of what the hell has just happened, registering the death, funeral planning. And then I was like, oh my God, I've got to go back to London. I've got to pack and clear out my whole house. So we had to do that. I think it was 6 days after he died, which was just like, it was horrendous. Like, I loved my house. It was the first house I'd lived in London. Like, I'd had the best time. And, you know, I'd left it on Monday lunchtime, like completely normal, bit worried about my dad, not really sure what was going on. And then I was coming back, you know, literally 6 days later, and losing my home as well. And like, I just lost my dad, and I was losing my home. Like, it was awful. So that kind of took a bit, that sort of has added like complications. I did find a new house, and it has been great, but it's still a change. And then the job, they got back in touch, and I finished off the interview process sort of immediately after his funeral, somehow got the job. So started that as well. So by, you know, 3 months from the day he died, I had, moved out of one house, moved into another house with a bit of time at my mum's in between, and was starting a new job that was like a big career step up. And that's quite a lot. So it didn't go great. That winter was really difficult. Me and my mum had a trip to Australia just after Christmas to see some of our best friends that live out there. So I was just focusing on like, just get to Australia. And And yeah, I came back and went back to the job and carried on. And it just got to a point where I was like, yeah, new house, new job, dead dad. It's quite a lot. So I basically quit the job, and they were like, hang on, we recognize there's some pretty major circumstances here. We'll hold your job for 6 months, take a break, and have a think. And yeah, it will be here for you.
Which is a nice reflection both on the company and on you at the company as well.
I think I was really bad. I've been told many times that I wasn't bad when I was there, but I think I was awful because I kept crying in the office. And yeah, I didn't feel like I was, being my best self and performing as I think I should have done. But every time I say that, I get told off. So apparently I was doing well, but there we go. So I've been off, which has been good because just to have a moment to kind of breathe and kind of be like, wow, okay, all of this has really happened. It's been more complications that being booted out of this current house again. My mum is moving from the home that her and my dad had, and obviously there's always drama and complications with house moving, buying, selling chains. So I've been able to be there a lot more for her than I would have done. We've been able to clear out the house altogether and things like that. So, I think a lot of people were like, hop on a plane and go traveling for 6 months. But I've done that in the past when I was younger, and I do love traveling, but that's not what this time was for. I've been on holiday, but like, that wasn't what I wanted to do and what I needed to do. Like, I needed to be there for my mom primarily. And also just being able to enjoy kind of being a tourist in London a bit has been really nice. Because like, we live in this incredible city, and a lot of the time all we do is like work, gym, go out for drinks. Like, you just living your normal life. So actually having time to, go to places when it's a bit quieter in the middle of the day on a work day. Though I always find it hilarious. I look around at people and I'm like, why aren't you at work? I know why I'm not at work, but why aren't you at work?
Interesting.
But yeah, it's been good to kind of have that time, be able to like focus on therapy, and yeah, like help my mom a lot has been kind of the bulk of it really. But
So then thinking about your experience and reflecting on how the pieces of advice that you might give someone going through something similar, starting with, a lot of what you've spoken about is how you supported your mum. If someone's parent, dies or has died, and part of their role is also supporting their parent, what sort of advice do you have for someone there?
I think it's hard. I think I have found it difficult at times. I'm torn between, I want to be there for her. She's my only parent. She's my priority. And then also sometimes getting really annoyed at her. Sorry, Mum. When there's things that like my dad would have done. Like, he was very much the tech person, finances, DIY, all of that. And so I'm kind of had to step into that. And it will like really frustrate me when my mum like can't do something with her phone or whatever. Because I'm just like, you should know how to do this. It's like basic, but she doesn't. And I think it's that, your relationship with the surviving parent, like, it will change. I mean, I guess I'm lucky in that we never had a difficult relationship. We always got on well. We were always close, but I do feel like it has changed. I definitely feel a level of like responsibility and guilt. I always had a bit of only child guilt of like, oh,
What does that mean? Both the guilt and the only child guilt?
I think if I wanted to move to Australia, I always felt bad of like, I'd be leaving them. Like, they haven't got any other kids. Like, what if, at the moment they're, well, I don't know, so he was 57 and my mum was 59. But like, obviously as they get older, like, I'm going to be the only one. And I think I'd seen, my granny was sort of quite elderly and frail for many years. And, seeing my dad and his sister kind of share the burden of that and kind of thinking, okay, I haven't got anyone else. Like, it's going to fall on me. And that's just been magnified by like sorting everything with my mum, my dad, like all the admin, funeral, knowing that, oh God, I'm going to be doing this on my own one day.
That's
And
tough.
yeah, and that like if I was to go, like say, move to Australia, like I just couldn't do that. I couldn't leave her on her own. So I feel like it kind of changes maybe things that I would have seen for myself in my life. Yeah, whereas I don't know, maybe still feel the same if you have siblings. Like, I don't know, you tell me. I can only speak from not having siblings, but I think there definitely is that like, it's only me.
That's really interesting. That is really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have 3 siblings, and I do.
Greedy.
Yeah, exactly. And I do very viscerally feel that sense of like there being this other, other teammates out
Yeah.
there. So yeah, I really empathize with the feeling that you have, and it makes sense. Makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. And I think there's no easy, like, I think I made the decision to move back to London. Sort of, I think I was at hers for maybe about 2 months because she wanted me to. She was like, I don't want you to stay here. Like, you love living in London. And I think it was the best thing because I think it was important that we had time apart to kind of deal with our own grief because it's hard. Like, it's good to be together, and there has been times where I'm like, I'm just going to come and stay. Like, if when something bad's happened, like we just like we need to be together. But I think it's also been important for me to kind of have that space and to have that like normal life aside from that.
That's really interesting, and that's maybe something which isn't immediately obvious from the outside when you're thinking about people grieving.
Yeah, and like it's hard. I think there's been I part of me is like it's great, having times with my friends and going out and having fun and kind of forgetting about it because I never forget about it, but just being a normal 26, well now 27-year old. But I think sometimes when there's like big planned events, I find that a lot harder. Like a wedding or that sort of thing there's a pressure to be happy and to like keep going, or like I haven't really been out like with big groups much, I'd say, to like long events maybe, because I just sometimes I'm just like no, like I feel really shit today. Like
Right.
it's not a gradual improvement. I think that's what I'd say as well to people is don't expect that each day you'll feel a little bit better and then just feel really bad on the big dates. Like it's so up and down, round circles. Like yeah, I don't say that. I wouldn't say now that I feel 12 months of worth of better.
Gotcha. Right.
Like it still feels a year I've learned is nothing. Like really is nothing.
And then in terms of those kind of like ups and downs and backs and forth of navigating grief, people often talk about like the 5 stages of grief.
Bullshit.
Interesting. Okay. And in what sense do you feel like it wasn't necessarily not necessarily a good framework for understanding not necessarily good a framework for understanding how it was for you?
So it's quite a like contentious like theory that is in the grief world, because I've been listening to a lot of podcasts and following like Instagram pages and
What sort of
communities.
podcasts and
So mostly ones that are very much dedicated to like young people that have experienced loss, often parent loss, but not always. But things, there's one called like the Grief Gang, the Dead Parent Club, If We Don't Laugh, We Cry, I think it's called. Yeah, and various sort of things like that. That it just makes you feel like you're not the only one, because obviously I haven't got luckily a lot of friends that have lost a parent. Like good, we shouldn't at our age, but it can then make you feel like okay, no one really gets this. So it is kind of nice to have those things and those communities. And yeah, one of them called It's Time. It's a charity, and they offer various support for young people that lost parents. and I wrote a piece for them the other week. Well, I wrote it a few weeks ago and it got published.
What was
early
the piece called?
Well, it didn't really have a name. It was just
Okay.
my story. Like,
Ignore that question. Yeah.
It was just like you just like submit your story, basically.
Cool.
Yeah. But it was just about kind of everything that I've talked about today, and kind of how I feel coming up to a year, and kind of how, it's been a year. Like, I've survived a year, but how do I come to terms with that? There's another year and another year and another year, and he's, it's not like, oh, I've made it through the first year. I feel like there's a lot of pressure put on like making it through the first year.
Gotcha.
But it's like, it doesn't then end. He doesn't come back. And I think the 5 stages of grief thing, realised I've gone off on a tangent. It was originally a theory actually designed for people that were dying, people that have been diagnosed with terminal illness. It was designed to show the stages that person goes through in terms of accepting their death.
Interesting.
That's what the theory was originally. The framework was what that was done for, but it's kind of been adopted and twisted and changed, and suddenly become a 5 stages of grief. And like, it's not, you definitely don't neatly move through these phases. I guess, you do feel all those things, but you also feel a lot of other things, and not necessarily in any order.
Were there any emotions or feelings or kind of, mental states that you experienced that you were like, how do I deal with this?
Yeah, I think I've been very angry.
Interesting.
And I think that's something that we don't tend to talk about that much. I feel especially like feminine rage in general is not really like, we're not meant to get, angry, but I'm really angry at the world and for the fact that this happened. And that's been really hard to deal with, because I wasn't really like an angry person before, I wouldn't say. But I just get furious and jealous of people that aren't in this situation. Which is not very nice, obviously.
How does that kind of manifest itself in your day-to-day experience? Like the moments when you would feel like that, does it come at random, or is it like intrusive thoughts, or
I think I probably just like am aware that there's probably been times where things have happened to people I know that aren't like as bad as what happened to me, even though, everyone has different things, and it's not to take away from their experiences, but I really struggle to then have that like sympathy, empathy. So I'm worried that I'm like, oh, am I being a bit of a dick? But like, I just keep comparing everything to like, I know it's not a competition. Like, grief is not a competition, but like, it's really hard not to be like, yeah, but what happened to me was so much worse. I just feel like this is kind of why I did the writing thing as well. And I just want it to be heard. Like, I want to talk about him. Like, I want people to know about him. And I think that's the thing, is knowing that obviously I'm not married, I haven't got a partner, I haven't got kids. If I do have that in the future, he's never going to have met them, they're never going to have met him. And I think about my dad's dad, who died before I was born. I don't have any really knowledge of him. I don't feel like I know him. Like, I really don't. And I think partly that's generational. He was a bit older, and I think my dad and him certainly weren't as close as me and my dad are. But I don't feel like I know him at all. He's just a guy that died before I was born. And it absolutely kills me that my potential future kids might have the same perspective.
Yeah, that's tough.
On my dad, which is, like, horrible. It's really hard, because I just think he was such a good dad, and one day he would have been a great granddad, I'm sure. And like, he was like a big kid himself. And it just feels so odd to me that he's not gonna physically feature in people's lives, people that might, be the most important people to me in the future. Which is just, it's really hard to get my head around. I think partly because the three of us, me and my mum and my dad, we always were so close. So, there'd never be a situation where they weren't in my life unless they'd died. So, it's a tough one.
Very much so. Very much so. And then thinking about, some water. It's really well spoken. Obviously can't be saying that.
No, keep it in.
Fine.
Keep the compliments in.
Thinking about yourself in another 12, 24 months time, what do you think that version of yourself, looking back now, how do you think they would advise or console you or tell you to focus on?
Yeah. It's so hard because, like I say, this year has gone unbelievably fast. Like, I feel like I've blinked and we're here. And I think I thought at the time that in a year's time, I would maybe feel, I don't know, not better, not over it, but like processing it more. But I still don't feel like I've really processed it. So I hope, in another year, 2 years, hopefully I will have, and kind of be able to be like, it does get better again, like life does get better. And it won't always, obviously it'll always be there, but it won't be kind of the forefront of your mind and your life all the time. Who knows?
Gotcha. And then in terms of the forefront of your mind, what's on the horizon for you right now? You mentioned it at the very start of the podcast. What are you looking forward to most right now?
Taylor Swift.
And what's your go-to Taylor Swift shower song?
That's too hard. There's so many. I cannot pick. That's like picking a favorite child. I can't.
Which was easy in your parents' case, yeah.
Well, exactly. Yeah, I'm so excited. I'm so excited to go to the Eras tour, and it's been such a long wait. And it's nearly here. It's 2 weeks today. 2 weeks today.
Nice.
I'm gonna cry a lot. So she's got one song that's about, I think it's about the death of her grandma, actually. It's about grief, so I'm gonna sob to that.
What's it called?
Marjorie,
which
I think was the name of her grandma.
Gotcha.
So I'm gonna cry a lot to that. And then there's loads that have just been my like angry crying at how shit men are songs. So I'm definitely there's gonna be a lot of crying. It'll be great.
Gotcha.
I'm very excited.
Cool. Okay. Really appreciate your time. I also think this is just like a hugely meaningful and touching subject that either people who are going through this right now or might go through it in the future. I think there's a lot of value in what you said. So yeah, really appreciate the openness.
Thanks.
Cool. Awesome. That was so good. That was so good.